Good evening. Welcome to this is the Lewisville 2025 Touchpoint Public Workshop. I want to thank you for coming. Each and every one of you, I want to thank you for being here. Nothing impacts your lives more each day than your city. And in turn, you've made the important decision to impact the future of your city by joining in this workshop. So again, I want to thank you. Whether you participated in the original 2025 discussion or have attended Citizens University or other items that the city conducts for education and outreach, or you're joining the opportunity to define the Lewisville's planning for the first time, you're offering your help to make your city a better place to live for all. And ultimately, it's not just a place, it's the combined efforts of all citizens. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaged. Tonight, we build on the successful Lewisville 2025 vision plan process. That plan was developed using nearly 1,500 comments and ideas from more than 400 people in the community. This time, we have talked to even more people to collect new ideas and new recommendations. Lewisville 2025 resulted in significant and visible changes to how the city operates, from budgeting all the way out to service delivery. And further, Lewisville received 2 awards, and you may have seen them outside, from the Texas chapter of the American Planning Association. The first award in 2014 came shortly after City Council approved the plan, and it was formally adopted by the council at that time, and it was for excellence in comprehensive planning. And then a second award came late last year, the first ever gold level award for the category of plan implementation, and that was again for the 2025, first one ever in the state of Texas. So yes, and now So now we're up for a third one, which is under consideration at the American Planning Association national level for a gold award across all communities in the entire United States for implementation of 2025. And truly, 2025 has set the gold standard for city planning in Texas, and it could be setting the gold standard across the entire America. So I think that's pretty impressive. We all deserve to be proud of both awards and the results the plan has created, and we are thankful to every person who joined to create and implement 2025. Touchpoint offers us a look at 2025 to date to see what remains to be done, update the plan where needed, and identify new opportunities and challenges to address for the future. The end result will then become the new Lewisville 2035 vision plan. We hope you have had the opportunity to visit the engagement stations that are in the recital hall. If not, you can do so after the speaker presentations. You can also provide feedback if you have time, and that can be done online at cityoflewisville.com/touchpoint. So tonight's guest speakers were chosen based in large part on common themes that were found in comments that have already been received from over 600 people who participated in Touchpoint to date. These are topics that likely will have a major impact on Lewisville's future. So at this point, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Karen Walls. And thank you.
Thank you, Neil. It's so exciting to see all of you here. I'm excited for the input we've already gotten from you and for the other input that you're going to share with us this evening. And I know that you are going to be really excited about the ideas that our speakers are going to be sharing with you. We, as the council member mentioned, we've been getting your comments all around the building this evening. We want to use a couple of other techniques during the course of this workshop session, and one of those has to do with these keypads. Does anybody not have a keypad? If you do not have a keypad, please raise your hand. And somebody's going to come up from the back, I hope. Everybody have a keypad? Okay, so the keypad polling is one piece of our input, and one of the reasons, there are a couple reasons why we find it to be useful and why we're going to be using it as part of our input this evening. First of all, it allows us to get feedback from all of you all at once on the same question. So you're going to be sharing your ideas and your perspectives about the same questions all at once, so we can get a lot of information from many people that way. So also, it's anonymous. You can say exactly what you think with the keypad. We're not going to ask you to raise your hand or do something of that kind. Also, what I find most people like is that you'll see the results immediately up on the screen. So you'll get a sense of whether the other folks, your other friends and neighbors here, have similar ideas to yours, or whether your ideas might be different from those of other participants. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at what's on the screen tonight, but we will be able to do that after the session. So we're going to be able to take this information, and it will be part of shaping the update to the Lewisville plan. So just to get us started on that, I'm going to ask you to do a couple practice questions. So here's the first one, and so if you look at that, you make your pick. Whichever number you choose, press the button on the keypad and press it down pretty firmly. A light will probably flicker, but it's not going to stay on, but just push it firmly down. And the other thing to tell you, and it might not matter on this question, but there are no do-overs. So the first thing that you push is what's going to count. Okay, so I'm going to give everybody a minute to think about this. Is a very important topical question for right now. Has everybody had a chance to think about that? Is anybody still debating? Okay, let's take a look. Okay. So we know we're all over the place here, but I guess we've got a little bit more of a Kansas City crowd than some of the other folks. So the other thing I want to point out to you as you're doing the keypad polling is up on the top right-hand part of the screen, you can see a little red box. As we go through the questions, don't click on your clicker until that box turns green. If you click it too soon, we won't be able to collect your answer. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you a second practice question. This is an analogy. So pumpkin pie is to Cool Whip as lemon pie is to what? Okay? Well, just take your best guess. We're not, this one isn't going to be a really long-term priority, I don't think. But who knows? Maybe we'll need a cooking class after this. Anybody still thinking about that one? All right. So nearly everybody got the meringue correct there. I guess we should talk to whoever thought it was nuts. Okay, so those two questions are just to give you a little practice with these keypads. Now I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions so we get a sense of who all is here this evening. And so, again, these questions are just to share your perspective, your opinions, your background. And so the first question, if you could give us a sense of where you live, whether you live in a part of Lewisville, if you live in Castle Hills, or if you live in some other part of the region or somewhere else, that's also great. Please let us know. Okay, so we've got a good mix of folks, and I'm glad to see some Castle Hills folks here as well as those from Lewisville. So the next question is similar about where you work. If you work in Lewisville or Castle Hills, we've listed the other bigger cities in the region, Fort Worth and Dallas, or if there's somewhere else, or if you are retired, you're a student, you don't work outside the home, whatever your circumstance is, please let us know that. Okay, great. A lot of people who are living and working in Lewisville, so it's great that you're doing both things here. Tell us a little bit about your age. And again, remember, this is anonymous. Okay, so a good range there as well. And then my last question is about the involvement that you might have had with that Lewisville 2025 process that the Deputy Mayor Pro Tem just mentioned. Did you participate? Are you helping to implement it? You've read reports on it, reviewed it online. Notice that there is also a choice here if you've done several of those things, or if this is the first time that you've been involved. Let us know that too. Okay, great. It's wonderful to have such a range of experience amongst all of you with the plan. Now, we're going to keep using these keypads periodically as one of the ways for you to give us some feedback and information based on what you're going to hear from the speakers. So please hold on to them at this point. As I say, we'll be using them later on. We will ask you at the end to turn them back in because they aren't going to work on your garage doors or your TVs or anything at home. Okay, with that, I'd like to really turn to our keynote presentation. We are really excited about the presentation that Patrick Ibarra is going to be sharing with us. I believe all of you got programs, and so you see a brief description about each of our speakers in the program. But what I want to tell you is that Patrick is the co-founder and partner of the Mejorando Group, an organizational effectiveness consulting firm that's looking at things like timing, innovation, and next best practices to help governments and communities succeed in the 21st century. That word mejorando means getting better all the time, and so I'm looking forward to hearing Patrick's strategies for how Lewisville can do exactly that. Please help me welcome Patrick Ibarra.
Good evening. I grew up in Kansas City, so I voted for the Chiefs like 4 times. I'm delighted to be here tonight. I consider tonight to be an honor and a privilege. Before I get started with my remarks, it's incumbent upon me to say thank you. Thank you to Karen and everybody in a purple shirt. Please stand up. Let's give this group a round of applause. The rest of us just showed up to eat and talk, so thank you so much for doing that. I'm going to start off with asking you to do a favor for me. And this is a little bit different, but I think you'll find it to be very powerful. Close your eyes. And keeping your eyes closed, think of some of the best memories in your life. Maybe it's when you got married, birth of a child, maybe when you got unmarried. Think of some of the best times in your life. Now open your eyes. I would doubt anybody in here had words cross their mind's eye. We think in images. When you think about Lewisville today, yesterday, and tomorrow, we don't just think of words. We think in images. And tonight, myself and the other speakers really are here to help draw out of you what's the image of the future. What's that start to look like? Is it a portrait? Is it a picture? Is it a photograph? When you ask people what they think about living in Lewisville, they don't tell you what they think. They tell you how they feel. So what I'm going to try to do in the time I have is to help you kind of stimulate some of your thinking, be somewhat provocative, also practical and thoughtful. So here we go. That's a little bit about me. Are we changing as fast as the world around us? Think of the speed and velocity by which communities are evolving. And if you've lived in Lewisville for any period of time, you've seen a lot of changes. Some positive, maybe some not so positive. That's the nature of communities. There's nothing automatic in Lewisville. Things are happening 24/7. It's being pushed and pulled in all types of directions. And really what tonight is another milestone in your community's history and an upward trajectory of thinking about the best days of Lewisville are in front of it, not behind it. There's always people that live in a world that no longer exists. These are the same people driving around the community trying to find a place to fix their VCR. They said, well, last time it was right next to Blockbuster. So when you think about it, I'm just trying to be a little lighthearted about some of that, right? It's trying to look at the future. What's that start to look like? And tonight, what's an exciting component of this as a backdrop, this is democracy in action. And we're still trying to figure out democracy. I live outside of Phoenix in Glendale, Arizona. I have clients all over the country working with cities and counties and communities. I travel about 125,000 miles a year. You know you've been traveling too much when you call down for room service and your spouse hangs up on you. And there's still plates in the hallway in the morning. But what I find interesting in communities, rural or urban, large or small, is this notion of community building, citizen involvement. We're way past citizen participation. Civic engagement is different than citizen participation. You can count participation. How many people show up? How many people were at the egg toss? How many people showed up at a Christmas tree lighting? That's participation. That's not the same thing as engagement. So when you look at this community's history, whether you've lived here a year or longer, this is another milestone of doing outreach to enlist the involvement of people in the future. So when you look at the speed and examine that, I'm not saying faster is better, but there's things being foisted upon this community that are not self-imposed. It's being driven by other forces. And I want to share just a perspective about that tonight. And I would also share with you the role of local government. I spent 15 years in city government. I'm a former city manager before I started my practice in 2002. And the role of local government, I would contend, is to be the protagonist for a better quality of life. You're the advocate. And those of you that choose to participate are really trying to improve the quality of life. Government's about social outcomes. It's not just about outputs. And that's really what you're trying to fashion tonight and going forward as this touch point is what's the community start to look like? What's the fabric? How does that evolve? And what's that start to trend towards? So the challenge sometimes is what made you successful in the past is not necessarily going to help you survive and thrive in the future. That's the nature of change and disruption. The last thing this community is static. It's highly dynamic. And that's kind of counterintuitive to local government sometimes, which tends to be predicated on stability. There's nothing automatic in this community. It's highly dynamic. All you got to do is drive around and think about how long you've lived here, what's changed, how's it going to change in the future. And as we all know, things don't always improve as time passes. Things are always at risk. And you're trying to figure out how do you fashion that future. Now, I was going to bring, but I forgot, it's out in the car, I was going to bring a crystal ball. Does anybody out there have a crystal ball to share with us? Yeah, that's a little hard to peer into the future. But think about where you have been. You've got a glorious, wonderful legacy history in this community. You're always trying to capitalize on that, optimize that. It also is going to require you to do some things different and do some different things. And let me share with you a little bit about what factors are impacting the community. And not just this community, but communities all over the country. In the middle of this, the eye of the storm, if you will, is an acronym. It's VUCA, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, or another day that ends in Y. And going clockwise here, I just want to share with you just a little bit about factors that are putting pressure on this community. I call these the headwinds of change. You can't fix these. However, it's important to acknowledge these. And this is all about being proactive. And tonight is another step of this community trying to be proactive to shape and create its future. At the top is politics and citizen activism. What are we seeing across the nation? Are people getting more involved or less involved? What do you notice? I mean, look at by the attendance tonight. People are getting more involved. As I say, nobody washes a rental car. Why don't people wash a rental car? They have no sense of ownership. Some people are a spectator to their own community. Some people are a spectator to their own life. If you live in Lewisville, you volunteer to live here. If you're an elected official, you volunteer to serve here. If you're an employee, you volunteer to work here. If you're a business owner, you volunteer to invest here. People join in, they volunteer to be here. You all volunteered to be here tonight. Think about that in the notion of being involved. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Going clockwise, the mistrust of institutions. We're at a national all-time high of the mistrust of institutions. Not a good thing. It does start to make us question authority. Should we believe policymakers? And as was mentioned earlier, we all know that local government, I tend to be an advocate, a little biased. I think local government tends to solve its own problems best because it's the people that are involved that are closest to those issues. You all know and may attend a council meeting. You all know, maybe many of you know your council member. You know, when you get elected, you can no longer buy ice cream at the grocery store. Because when you put ice cream in your cart, by the time you leave, it's melted. Because you have people pushing you and pulling you in different directions. Let's do less of this, let's do more of that. So this mistrust of institution does not bode well for us as a democratic nation. And I think this is evidence that despite all of that, you're still trying to be proactive about building a stronger, more vibrant quality of life in the Lewisville community. The third one is consumption habits. And what I mean by that is just the notion about how we're buying things. How many of you spent most of your money and time online to buy Christmas gifts? A lot of people. Amazon. Amazon's a convenience store. What young people don't realize is Amazon is the 21st century of the Sears catalog in the 20th century. Raise your hand if you remember the Sears catalog, the 20th century. How many of you remember the Christmas catalog? How many of you remember circling things and giving it to your parents? You had all kinds of things marked. You put it on their bed. Then Christmas morning, you got like a pair of pajamas. Wasn't really exciting. Just think about people's consumption habits, how we're changing how we do commerce. I want to know when we're going to be able to vote by phone, on our phone. If you can bank on your phone, why can't you vote on your phone? West Virginia and Louisiana, first two states in the union to use blockchain to allow people that are residents stationed overseas to vote in local elections. Iowa, first state in the union to issue your driver's license on your phone. So we're just seeing all these, and as young people join government and lead government, they don't say why, they say why not. They're the ones right now doing Snapchat and Instagram about where they are tonight, by the way. Shifting demographics. There's 76 million boomers. Raise your hand if you're a baby boomer. Yeah, be careful of that soft shoulder tissue injury. Holding the planet up on our shoulders. We invented work. Just ask us. There's 76 million boomers, 50 million Xers. Raise your hand if you're an Xer between 40 and 50. Raise your hands high. Look, you're finally getting attention. Raise your hand. The middle child generation. Usually you can tell the Xers because on their shoulders a chip. Millennials, take your earbuds out and raise your hand. Look, they got both hands up. There's 77 million millennials. Usually you can tell the millennials because it's not a chip and it's not sore because there's a trophy on there. Anyway, now you're awake, right? And there's 82 million centennials. Raise your hand if you have a child or grandchild under the age of 19. They're the largest segment in the community, in the nation. And for the first time globally, there are more people under 65 than under 5. And for the first time in U.S. history, there are more people over 60 than under 5. Yeah, that's a big wow factor. How does that portend? I'm not sure. And when you look at it, going forward, is changing expectations. The public has changing expectations, how they want to be involved. It also can be somewhat fickle. It's the old Henry Ford comment who said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they just said faster horses. So the public can be fickle about what you ask them to do. Economic and environmental, that's always shifting, and social media. These are all putting pressure on communities. And policymakers and staff and residents are trying to figure out, how do you unknot these threads? How does this impact our future? Because these are not linear processes. These are disruptive and nonlinear. And when you look at the issues that you're trying to contend with, I would offer to you it's about your mindset. Some people have to shift their mindset about solving problems. And I have this saying that problems define solutions. And tonight is not about a deficit fixing process. You're not here necessarily to fix things. You're here really to build on your strengths, to identify some areas for improvement in the community. What is it that you want to do differently? How do you want to shape that? And what we're seeing across the country, and Lewisville is, I think, front and center about this, is quality of life amenities are now risen to the point where they're mission critical. People want to know what they do after work. People want more opportunities, whether it's rec programming or more ball fields or more public art, just all of those areas that are continually putting pressure. And tonight's another step in that direction, trying to figure what some of that looks like. So let me ask you this again. How do residents feel about living in Lewisville? And I'm going to share with you just a quick example of some different businesses that some of you have shopped. These aren't their brand, this is their logo. And these businesses, highly successful, know their market. How many of you shop at Costco? Raise your hand if you shop at Costco. Costco is a master of behavioral economics. They know that we think we get better prices if we buy in bulk. Are they a price leader? No, but you don't go to Costco for that. You go for convenience. Look at all the others. Walmart, their price is king. Aveda, how many of you have an Aveda product? High-end shampoo, but it smells so good. It's the experience. Starbucks. Who would have thought 15 years ago you'd be dropping $15 for a pumpkin spice coffee, but it tastes so good. Just think about how these businesses know their market. Government sometimes struggles, and what they're finding, I think this process is another step in that direction. You don't just have residents, you have demographics. And how does it continually customize this community to satisfy the needs of demographics? That's a tall order, right? And that's what you're trying to shape and influence tonight. Again, I'm just sharing that with you. And as you look at community building, local governments, Lewisville in particular, these are all different components of how it's building a community. One segment, going clockwise here, is customer service. Donna and her team and the mayor and council are always trying to make sure that the services that they're providing is a great experience, even in a regulatory way. But the customer service is part of that community building. Going clockwise here, social media. It's about building social currency, which helps drive change. And communities all across the nation are trying to figure out how to acquire and leverage social capital. So I'm not sure that we've figured that out yet. It's still evolving. Publications, products, publications that are produced, whether it's a program for tonight, things that are printed. They're also trying to reach out and say, here's what they're doing, here's what you're doing as a government, here's what we're doing to help you lead a better quality of life. Mobile apps. As I was cornered out here, have I loaded the mobile app? Hopefully you've all loaded the mobile app. That's not a luxury anymore, it's an expectation. It's how people often interact with their community. Boards and commissions. Raise your hand if you've served on a board or commission. Raise your hand if you're thinking about serving on a board and commission. Raise your hands high so people can come around and get your name and email address. The challenge with boards and commissions that a lot of communities are finding is volunteerism means something different when you're 35 than when you're 55. A lot of communities are using up their supply of volunteers. And it's really mission critical to find people who are community minded to serve on those boards and commissions. And that's another way. And then public processes. Obviously tonight is symbolic, it's emblematic of a public process, not only to reach out, but also to gather in. This is more than just people telling you. This process is highly interactive. So it's not just us talking to you, it's also all these engagement stations and other processes where you're sharing input. And that doesn't always come in a nice, neat package, does it? It kind of comes in a way that it's kind of on your doorstep and it's not in a package that's with a perfect bow on it, but it usually bangs on the door and says, hi, I'm here. And my role tonight is to get you thinking about your lenses. Is your view through a microscope or a kaleidoscope? Think about the lenses that you use. It's the old idea, if the only thing you have is a hammer, then everything is a nail. Tonight you're going to share perspectives, you're going to listen to different perspectives, and this step is another process to listen to your neighbors. How do they see things? How do they shape things? What do they want to see more of? What do they see less of? Because if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got, and sometimes that's not good enough. So I encourage you to reflect, to ponder, to be patient and empathetic as you listen to your neighbors. And then finally, just for something to go from, the future is run and won by those who are willing to think differently. Always an opportunity in communities, the thought process, the lens. Democracy is messy. It's intended to be somewhat slow. And boy, do we live up to that. And that's okay. This is a public process where there's a lot of input. We're trying to figure things out. You're trying to figure things out. If it was easily done, you would have already done it. So understand the nature of some of these issues. It's not arithmetic, it's calculus. There's a lot of moving parts, and you're trying to figure them out. And you're trying to do it in partnership and cooperation and collegiality with your neighbors, because you all have something in common. Everyone in this community, in this room tonight, has something in common. You all love Lewisville, and you know the best days of this community are in front of it, not behind it. I hope my comments, just in this time that I had, help you accelerate your journey as an individual, as a resident, as a volunteer, as a community member, to help Lewisville get better all the time. Thank you so much. And go Chiefs.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate those comments and those challenges. And we want to now, before you get distracted about the thing, while this is still fresh on your mind, I want to get you thinking about some of the ideas that Patrick just shared with you. So we're going to ask you to use those keypads again for a couple of questions to get some feedback on some of those ideas that you just heard. So first question here, what do you think the future will be? Is it going to be extremely different from the past? Is it going to be, might be a few things that change, but it'll be mostly like the past? Or is it going to be pretty much just continuing that past? Okay, so I think, Patrick, you've got them persuaded there that that's going to be quite different. So then the next thing, I will help create Lewisville's future by doing what? Are you going to act in different ways, be involved more than you were before, maybe about the same, maybe be less? What do you think for you yourself in Lewisville? Okay, now so that's a lot of involvement, and we look forward to hearing and talking more about how you might do that as we go forward tonight and with the rest of this process and looking ahead. The next thing we want to do, and this is partly what Patrick was saying, is this is really about talking to your neighbors. I'm going to ask you to spend a few minutes talking to some of the people that are around you, and I'm going to give you 4 ideas up on the screen that Patrick mentioned in his comments. And what I'd like you to do is talk to somebody that's sitting near you that you don't know. Don't talk to your husband or your wife. Talk to somebody who you don't know that's sitting nearby you, and see if you can agree on which one of these ideas is going to be the most critical for Lewisville's future. Okay, so the first idea, idea 1, the growth of Lewisville will change who we are as a community. Is that the most critical idea that's going to have the most difference for Lewisville? Here's idea 2. The influence of criticism will derail our future. Here's idea 3. The best days of Lewisville are in front of us so long as the residents stay actively involved. And here's idea 4. Lewisville city government must continue to be proactive to help shape our future. So think about those 4 ideas. Pick somebody around you that you don't know and spend the next few minutes talking to them and see if you can agree on which one of those is the most important. Okay, so let me ask for a show of hands. How many of you and your new friends agreed on which idea was most critical? Okay, quite a few did. Okay, so now just for yourself, tell us which idea you yourself think is the most critical. This is the same list of ideas that you've just been talking about. Which one is the most critical to you? Thinking about what you just talked to your friend about. Okay, let's see. All right. The best days of Lewisville are in front of us as long as residents stay actively involved. So that's really interesting that that's such a strong agreement that you all have. And this is really a good night for you to be thinking about new ideas of how to be involved and how to do that. So we're delighted that that's where your thinking is going. As we move into our next segment of tonight's session, we're going to try to explore some of those ideas, and I think maybe that will give you even further ideas and some creative new thoughts about how you can be involved and what you want this city to be doing as we go forward. So the next set of speakers we've called the Future Choices. Each of them is going to focus on a particular aspect of choices that are facing Lewisville. So they're going to get into a little deeper into some of the things that Patrick sort of hinted at in his presentation. And I'm going to ask each of them will come up in turn. I'll introduce them briefly. They're going to give you a very passionate, I think, presentation. And again, I'll ask you for some feedback using the keypads. After we go through all of those, we'll have an opportunity to have some more dialogue about their ideas. But let's see what we can learn and get excited about. So the first one of our Future Choices speakers is Brandon PALANKAR. He is the founder of 3BL Strategies and works on the fields of place-based economic development, public engagement, municipal affairs, and he really is very interested in the issues of economics and affordability about new kinds of development. Please welcome Brandon.
Thank you. All right, just going to get set up here. I promised I would not go over my 1 hour time slot here, so there we go, getting started. You know, you're going to hear a recurring theme today that I think has already begun, and that's the idea of change, the one constant. And you have an opportunity ahead of you to sort of decide what that future might be. And I'm going to begin tonight with positing a couple potential futures, and futures that have lived themselves out, by the way, in other areas that provide examples. And one future has increasing congestion and traffic, no matter how many roads and added lanes you build, continual tax increases, deteriorating infrastructure while the costs increase over time. It comes down to fiscal stress for the municipality and for the private sector, as high growth areas in 20 years, as we're experiencing that high growth now, start to attract what we see today. Whether it's the big boxes that close and have no real opportunity for repurposing, whether it's Main Street and a lack of support for small, locally owned businesses, whether it's an eventual opportunity for today's prizes and your Class A office to look elsewhere. And counterintuitively, while all this is happening in this potential future, housing affordability actually gets worse. It's a worse quality of life. It's a higher cost of living. It's a future where 20 years from now, the children growing up today either can't afford to live in Lewisville or North Texas, or they can afford to, but it doesn't provide them the quality of life that they demand. Then we have the blue pill, another set of choices. And in this world, there's a range of mobility options. You can still choose to use the car, but you don't have to. You can walk to work. You can bike to work. We saw how many people live relatively proximate to work here in Lewisville. It's an opportunity to provide a range of options. And through that range, you have greater fiscal footing financially and socially. You have infrastructure that works to promote positive outcomes, the type of land uses and activities you want to see happen, a vibrant Main Street and attraction of economic development. At the same time, you have a range of housing options, from single-family homes to apartments to condos to townhomes and everything in between. And in this future, it works for multiple generations, for multiple lifestyles and choices, and it works for multiple economic strata. That's what community is really all about. So I think we'd all agree we'd rather see that second set of outcomes, but how do we get there? That's really the rub. What if I told you that the choices you make today and through this process are going to determine, is it the red-blue pill or is it the blue pill? And to do that, we have to sort of shed away some of the misconceptions that we might share about the built environment. There are only two ways we can build cities, communities, towns. We used to call this urban and suburban, but that doesn't really do justice. There are areas in the core of cities that are more suburban and drivable in nature. There are areas like Old Town here or McKinney or the Legacy West that are more urban in nature in suburban regions. And when I say urban, this can happen at all scales. Urban doesn't have to be 40-story towers. It could be a Main Street, a historic downtown, and everything in between. And to understand how we got here, let's take a very quick walk through history. Because we've lived in cities and towns and villages for about 7,500 years, maybe 10,000 years. And almost all of that we built for people. We built communities that wouldn't extend beyond a day's walk. And we see the vestiges of this in Rome and Paris and New York and these older cities that people love to go to for a week, 2 weeks. They don't have to get in a car. They say how fantastic it is, and then they return to suburbia. And there's nothing wrong with suburbia, but as I'll show you, it's about balance. Because in the last 1% of us living in this sort of communal setting, we have changed everything and turned it on its head. We have stopped building places for people, and we have prioritized the car and the automobile. We have prioritized getting to a place over the quality of that place. What does that say about our priorities? When this is an example of what a car can do for us. And it can do many great things. But this happens to be in Florida, but not too unlike some neighborhoods here, where there are backdoor neighbors. They share a fence. To get from one of these neighbors to the other is a 7-mile drive in 20 minutes. That is time wasted. That is nature that has now gone to pavement. When you expand this to do your 5 daily chores on a Saturday or to go to and from work, how much time are we spending getting to and from places at the expense of enjoying the places and the people that gather in them? So what's our alternative? Well, it goes back to that 99% of history that we can learn from. It's about these walkable urban environments as opposed to drivable suburban. And just what is a walk-up? I don't know how many are familiar with Walk Score out there. It's a grading system. The higher you are, the closer to 100, the more things you can walk to from your home. Stores, shops, amenities, the post office, schools. If you have a grade over 70 and a certain threshold of office and retail, we won't go into the details. This was done in research about 2 years ago. And all of this within 100 to 500 acres, that's a walk-up. And I think you're familiar with some of these entities and some of these neighborhoods around North Texas, whether it's downtown or uptown Dallas or Fort Worth, whether it's Legacy or McKinney, whether it's what's starting to happen here, both in your old town and perhaps elsewhere. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in some really seminal research that was conducted where we examined every single parcel of land in the entire North Texas region. And we came with some stunning results. Walk-ups, there are only 38 of them in 12,000 square miles. But this 0.1% of land represents 12% of your gross regional product. That represents over 100 times the productivity as drivable, suburban, auto-only areas. You see this in higher prices for office rents, for apartments and condos, for land values. We haven't seen a shift like this since the 1980s when we went in the other direction and flew from the cities to populate those early suburbs. You see this in economic development circles with companies that are locating in downtowns and in these mixed-use environments. And for those that prefer the older campus setting, you better believe they look for regions where their employees can live in these downtowns, lest they're not able to attract talent. And counterintuitively, and again, this is a challenge that we have to sort of face what we preconceively think, is that while it's more expensive to rent or to live there in terms of housing cost, it's actually more socially equitable to be in these walk-ups than in drivable-only areas. Why? Because you're not forced to have a car and $10,000 or $12,000 a year. You have those mobility options, and I've read not one, not two, but 6 articles in the last week alone that have shown for many residents it is becoming more costly to live in Houston or Dallas than New York, Boston, or San Francisco. That's going to become an issue over time. And then you say, well, that's all well and good, but we're in the here and now, and I've got my home, and it's the most, my prized possession, my greatest resource and investment. Single-family homes that are located within walking distance or within these areas that have these walk scores can see a 2 times premium over drivable suburban. And it's not just in terms of cost and of value. By focusing your growth in downtowns and these dense, walkable environments, you take development pressure off your bedroom communities. You improve your connectivity by having active nodes. You support local business and attract economic development. And you reduce the overall cost of living, as we discussed before. So where exactly is Lewisville in all of this? Well, through this research, we found Old Town is an emerging walk-up, and I expect that it will be down the road, and you have opportunities for other walk-ups also. And as we think about the communities in which we live and where we want to be, what if I told you that to preserve the suburban quality of life, we must embrace that balance. We must embrace the walkable urbanism, because for nearly all metros around the country, it's not the city cores that we've seen in the last 20 years. It's the suburban areas. It's your downtowns, as you have here, areas, whether it's Castle Hills, along the highway, where you can create these wonderful mixed-use environments to attract economic development and be social magnets of activity. So as we close up, what are the key takeaways? Build that range of housing, but focus them in these walkable areas to preserve what you love about your communities today. Leverage these nodes, invest in placemaking and infrastructure. I know it's a pain when they're ripping up a road as they are in downtown, but boy, it's going to pay off for generations into the future. Finally, there's an old proverb, Chinese proverb. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. I come from the Northeast. I've been down here a number of years. They wish they planted it 20 years ago. You have that opportunity today. It's easy to get fearful of growth and change, but we need a community that comes to a call to action to sponsor and support responsible growth and find that balance. That's the way to preserve what we love and move into the future. And as I close, I'll simply say, don't believe me, I threw a lot at you. There's some great resources out there. Visit some of these websites, others, inform yourselves, and find what's going to be best for your choice, because balance really is the key. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. So let's think about some of those ideas that Brandon shared, that kind of walkable area that he was talking about. Think about your own home. Can you walk to at least one park or one restaurant or one of these other things? Can you walk to more than one or none? Think about your own situation and respond to the question accordingly. Okay, so that looks like some promising opportunities that you could build on there. One of the things that Brandon mentioned and that we've heard a lot about in the comments so far in this process is about how it's becoming more and more expensive to live here, and affordability is becoming a concern. So tell us your perspective about Lewisville needs more housing that's affordable to whom? Which groups of people do you feel like we have the biggest concern for? There's 4 groups listed at the beginning, and then you also have the choice to say several of these, all of these, or you may feel like we have enough affordable housing. Okay, interesting views. Okay, let's move to our next presentation then, on cultural transformation and quality of life. Dr. Edward Rincon is a research psychologist, and he's president of Rincon and Associates, and they do market research in a fascinating number of different fields, particularly looking at multicultural markets, but also looking at all kinds of different specifics and the details, which I think you're going to be very interested in and maybe surprised at. Edward.
Thank you. Well, I don't know about you, but I've been fascinated with the presentations thus far, so it's really been a pleasure to listen to each of them. And I think this evening I'm going to share a few thoughts from my research practice that I've had for 45 years, where it's really, aside from just all the consumer research that we often do, lately I've been focused more on the types of quality of life issues, as has been already discussed today. But what the added element here is the cultural transformation and how these are going to either converge or possibly conflict. So the question that I pose is, will you embrace this cultural transformation, or are you likely to resist it? What I'll do is share some information from census and maps and other things to tell my story, but I'll also focus on here in Lewisville to give you some perspective as well about this cultural transformation. In case you didn't know it, 54% of the population today in Lewisville is multicultural, either a Black, African American, Hispanic, or an Asian person. 54%. Back in the year 2010, the Hispanic population was just around 29%, and the Asian community was a small 8%. Well, look at 2018 now. Now the Hispanic population has come to about 32%, the Asian population 10%, African Americans are 12%. So when you add those together, we're talking about a little over half of your community now is multicultural. Now, one thing that we wonder about, though, is whether this is mainly a positive experience, or what does the future portend? Much of what we've heard in the news, unfortunately, has portrayed multicultural people, especially Hispanics, as, well, I think the labels are right here in front for us to see. They've been portrayed as criminals, taking jobs away from Americans, underachievers, risk to the public health, having insufficient income, and they do not pay taxes. Of course, this could be just the result of a political season, but these types of stereotypes and portrayals have been existing for quite some time. On the contrary, much of the research that I've seen lately in the past that I personally have worked with myself shows that the contributions from multicultural communities is actually quite positive. They're a big source of our labor supply. They are entrepreneurs. In fact, they have some of the highest entrepreneurship rates in the country. They create many jobs, especially here in the state of Texas. They spend a lot of their earnings here in local communities. That helps to sustain the local community economy. And they're also inventors, almost by nature. 70% of the patents that have been issued at our high-tiered universities were from immigrants coming to this country. And of course, they've also defended our nation in many ways in times of war as well. The other thing that immigrants have done is kept our Social Security system solvent, because for many undocumented immigrants, they don't get the benefit from all the Social Security contributions that they make. So one other item that you should also be conscious of is that multicultural residents are far from poor. I don't think here in Lewisville you need to be too concerned about that. In fact, the latest information shows that the total population here in Lewisville earned about straining to hear, about $2.8 or so billion. 1.6 billion of that was earned by Hispanic residents in this community. Lower amounts were earned by African Americans and Asians. Collectively, about $2.3 billion earned by multicultural persons. So they are earning a lot of money, and they're also spending it, and they're a big part of sustaining your community. But we all know that sometimes we don't really know, despite their presence and their economic and other contributions, we don't know each other very well. And part of the reason is because journalism, for example, oftentimes what you hear and read in the news portrays immigrants as undesirable, criminals, some of the labels that I've mentioned earlier. So you don't hear too much about or read too much about the achievers and the inventors and the contributions they're making. Also, in academia, there's what I call inertia, the inability to move. What they're not doing is teaching our future generations of college students much about multicultural populations and how to market to them, their economic contributions, and other issues that shed a more positive light on these communities. I had the opportunity to teach a Hispanic marketing course at SMU's Cox School of Business for 2 years, and I happen to know another professor at UT Arlington that teaches a course on multicultural marketing. Other than that, these types of courses are rare, and I think they should be something that communities should demand. Segregated lifestyles. Well, despite what you may think, and population is growing, the census and other researchers tell us that we're not becoming more integrated, we're actually becoming more segregated as communities. And unfortunately, that happens not just in places where we learn in the schools, but also in churches and our social life. So all of these three things basically lead to one thing, the lack of cultural intelligence. So we don't know much about each other, we're not learning, and many institutions are not encouraging enough interaction with each other. What can happen, though, when you use stereotypes to guide your perceptions of culturally different people? This may be shocking to you, but this is an actual story that was published in the Morning News just a few years ago, and I've scanned the article itself because I didn't think you would believe it if I didn't show it to you. But this is a story about the Cambridge, Massachusetts Police Department that actually were training their police officers in the proper handling of Mexican subjects. And I'll read what it says to you if you can't read it up there very well. It says, pepper spray, and this is what they would use to, disarm a subject when they needed to. Pepper spray doesn't work well on Mexican-American suspects, the officer said. Why? Because Mexicans grow up eating too much spicy food, and because they spend so much time picking hot peppers in the fields. This was an officer that was training future police cadets in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So clearly, our stereotypes, whatever prejudices or stereotypes you might hold, whether you think they're harmless or not, can actually translate into bad decisions, bad programs, and bad policy. Well, growth does seem to impact many areas: crime, the environment, some cultural communications, access to food. Let me quickly just share a couple of experiences, recent experiences, where I've done a lot of research lately in the Dallas area. And one of the items that you may have seen a lot about recent news is the increase in homicides in the city of Dallas. In fact, last summer, I think all the city leaders were all concerned about the spike of 40 homicides, I believe they estimated last summer. So that encouraged a lot of the media, like in this case, NBC showed us a map of the distribution of homicides in the city of Dallas. And as you can see, it's not really clear. They're kind of scattered all over the place. But this wasn't the only map. They've done other maps before. And the general conclusion has been, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dallas, there's a north pretty much and a south Dallas. South Dallas has always been, well, quote unquote, the usual suspect, where all crime occurs at high rates, all the homicides occur there. And this map didn't really help us much to understand the real distribution of those crimes. So being the geek that I am, I love to do maps and GIS analysis and break things down just to understand what's really behind some of these stories. I did my own analysis and I retrieved actual police department data. And as you can see, the blue area there describes the southern sector or the South Dallas area. And the other sector is mostly the northern area. Well, the homicides that are presented there are pretty much scattered all over the place. So it wouldn't be, you wouldn't necessarily conclude that all the homicides are, that the South Dallas has the highest homicide rate just by looking at the map, but it is a better representation. And it's helpful to know that there's about 14 districts, city council districts, and it's good to know which ones they are. Well, I did another analysis, and I don't know if you remember, but Governor Greg Abbott was asked to send the state troopers to try to solve this homicide issue, or at least to try to remediate, provide some kind of intervention. This was last summer also. And they winded up in the South Dallas area. It's not clear exactly what they accomplished, but the second chart that I'm showing you here shows at the top is the South Dallas district, and at the bottom are the districts that are in the northern side. And it's pretty clear to see that most of the homicides for this year, which was 2019, between 2018 and 19, they weren't occurring in South Dallas districts. They were occurring in the northern side of the districts. So it suffices to say that the state troopers basically went to the wrong part of town, what I call the usual suspects. So I think that a more careful analysis of crime is probably a good idea, no matter what municipality it is, to make sure that you're sending and allocating the proper resources and not using prejudices or other perceptions of the usual suspects to make decisions. One thing we also know is that those schools that are populated by Black and Hispanic students also tend to be in closer proximity to toxic waste sites. This has been a problem in the past. I'm not saying this is a problem here in Lewisville, but it could be. If you're not monitoring what's going on with business and city decisions to encourage business, you may find a toxic waste site in your neighborhood someday. This particular map was put together, this was in the Dallas area, and the blue areas, the red areas basically show the toxic waste sites, and the bigger little houses, the red areas, show that the toxicity was higher than some of the others. And the little dots are the schools. Well, to make a long story short, Those schools that have more Black and Hispanic students are the ones that were exposed to higher levels of toxic waste in this community. This was in Dallas, by the way. This is something that all of us should be concerned about because the same types of practices could happen in your own school district. Food deserts is another topic that has been occupying my interest quite a bit. The green areas here, and this is Dallas County, by the way, and these are the city service areas, the boundaries that describe the 7 city service areas. The green areas basically show the food deserts. Food deserts are those communities that have limited or no access to a mainstream supermarket for different reasons. In Dallas County, just a few years ago, there were about 88 food deserts. Half of them were located in the southern side of the city, if you look at the green areas, or the west side of the city, that are dominated by Hispanic and African American residents. Food deserts usually are located in those areas. It's a serious problem because it doesn't only limit access to healthy food, but it also creates cardiovascular disease, obesity, and many other problems that have been documented for people who live in these cities, as well as cognitive deficits among children who don't have access to healthy food. This is not something that you want to happen in your community. Now, what is the picture in Lewisville right now? And this map shows, it's a current picture of food deserts. The one that's circled with a red circle at the top is your city. And as you can see, there are some food deserts surrounding the city of Lewisville. But look at the bottom underneath. The food deserts are all over the place with your neighborhood. And it almost looks like a swarm that's kind of headed your way. If you do nothing to prevent food deserts, they will come knocking on your city as well. You know, the advent of dollar stores also discourages supermarkets from flourishing in those communities. So I think that these lessons are things that you need to consider, okay? This is just one remaining slide that also shows that public housing is not something that everybody raves about, but we all know it's needed for many people. But it also displays a good way to display for every public housing how accessible are social services to these public housing sites. We have the technology now to be able to determine, you know, how well we're doing in meeting the needs of those people that need our services. The last chart here is about cultural communications. You may not think about this on a daily basis, but you should. In my experience, sometimes when we do surveys, sometimes when we publish communications from multicultural communities, we're not always thinking about the languages. The fact is that in our work in the past, in research and surveys and all that, we have always found that a good 60-70% of Hispanics will prefer Spanish when they're given a choice in communications. Asians are the same way. They prefer, a good 60-70% prefer their native language. And everybody usually thinks, well, Asians are highly educated. They know English well. They know it's better than some of us do, you know. That's not the point. When you establish a rapport with a certain native or foreign-born person, they can express themselves in more valid terms, more reliable terms. So you have enhanced the communication with that person when you give them a language option. We don't always think also about the language functions that we're measuring when we're doing surveys or other types of communication. We need to focus on whether this is a reading task, whether this is a writing task, this is a speaking task, or listening. If you're not thinking about that, then you could be translating for the wrong linguistic function. Race ethnic labels. Should I call our community, should I use the reference as Hispanic, Latino, or in reference to blacks, should it be blacks or African Americans? In reference to Asians, should it be Asian, Asian American, Chinese, Korean? If you don't know the answers to those questions, you need to know them, because you have the potential to not just offend those groups, but also to not engage them in the very task that you're trying to engage them in. Oftentimes, we rely on just government terms or academic terms, but really it's better, much better to go into that community and understand the labels that those community members prefer if you're doing a survey in their community, regardless of what the academics may be telling you. And of course, language also interacts with segregation. You know, we tend to sometimes segregate people in the media, for example. If you're going to be publishing announcements in Spanish language media, you should know that at least 2/3 of Hispanics are not even going to listen or understand Spanish language media. Why? Because in some communities, 2/3 or so of the Hispanics are native born. All they know or primarily know is English. So you need to be careful about, you know, your media placements when it comes to cultural communications. Some concluding thoughts. It's a good idea to monitor decisions that impact your family's quality of life. Don't just sit there and expect government leaders and city policymakers to know what's best for you. Because before you know it, there could be some toxic waste sites, there could be some food deserts growing in your community, there could be other things. And if you're not involved as a citizen, just like other speakers have said, it's going to happen before you know it. And by the way, it'll be paid with your tax dollars. And once they're here, it's too late sometimes too late to complain. Challenge decisions that compromise the quality of life, especially for multicultural persons. Now, you may not be a multicultural person, but they may be your neighbors. So it's a good idea to not sit still and just think that city leaders have the last word. Citizens are very powerful. Once they start collaborating and putting their voices together, they can indeed reverse or make changes or plan their future a little better. Get acquainted with some of the multicultural persons in your community. Get involved. Certainly your kids are doing a good job at the soccer fields. You should be doing the same thing in other kinds of similar events. The more you know about them, the less fear and suspicion you will have. And you may find, you may be very surprised to find that multicultural people share a lot of the same values as you do. That's my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rincon. So he suggested several ideas related to the multicultural character of this city and of our larger communities as well. So I want to ask you to first think about your own racial or ethnic or cultural background and think about this question here about, does it play an important role in the Lewisville community all year long, at certain festivals, when there are certain things that come up in the media, if there's something that's negative, maybe one of these, or maybe it doesn't play an important role at all. Think about your own background, what you think about for your own self. Okay, so that's an interesting dichotomy there. Now think about that last suggestion that you heard from Dr. Rincon about connecting and getting to know people of other cultures beyond your own. Where do you connect with people of other backgrounds? Several different possibilities here, or maybe more than one, or not particularly as part of your daily life. So our next topic is looking at a particular issue, the arts and culture and the role that they play, especially for the economy. And our speaker, Catherine Wagner, is the CEO of the Business Council for the Arts in this region, and they focus on some fascinating interrelationships and connections between the business community and arts and culture, and educating people about the value those two have for one another. Catherine.
Okay. So, well, thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I actually was with some of your wonderful Lewisville people yesterday at the Eisenman Center in Richardson, and we were talking about the arts in Lewisville. So you're doing a wonderful job. I'm going to be addressing the benefits of arts and culture to this city, and I wanted to start with a lesson from history. So I thought I was being really clever to start with the past, and yet we've heard that a couple of times, but at least my slide goes farther back than everybody else's. So I wanted to talk about not when Lewisville was founded or started in the 1840s, but when the pyramids were built, and about ancient wisdom and how it pertains to the city. So, interestingly, for a long time, people believed that the pyramids were built by slaves, right? Most people believe that, but they weren't. They were built on an economy that supported arts and culture. And so what happened is that the pharaohs pyramids were built by several different pharaohs, in all of their wisdom and glory, decided that taxation would be a new good idea. And so what they did was they taxed broadly, and then those taxes actually went into economic cycles. And that economic cycle was that when the Nile River flooded, the farmers couldn't farm it, so then they went to work on the pyramids. The pharaohs paid the farmers, the miners, the engineers, then their dollars, well, they didn't have dollars, that was pre-dollar, their goods then went to pay the cloth makers, the bread makers, and so forth. So the point being that the idea of arts and culture goes back as an economic driver eons, so not just centuries, but eons. So building the pyramids created an economy that supported lots of trades, increased quality of life to the degree possible, encouraged civic pride, and built a sense of community. But it did more than that. And I think, interestingly, so for their future, think of this as an investment that they made. For their future, every year now in Egypt, that investment they made in building the pyramids and that taxation is responsible for $29 billion worth of economic tourism, cultural tourism. And that investment also supports 2.5 million jobs each year. So keep that in mind, and then I want to go over to quality of life. So even in 4,500 years since the pyramids were built, human nature hasn't changed. And so we want what they wanted. We want what all people want. We want meaningful and full employment. We want the best advantages for our children's success. We want prosperity. We want quality of life. We want a promising future. And so the arts can do all of these. I wanted to talk a little bit about, going back to the economics of it, you've got to have revenue for this, right? You've got to have income. So here's an interesting study, and this study was done by Lewisville in conjunction with Americans for the Arts. We also took part in it. It's called the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study. It's nationwide, and it happens every 5 years. So what I did was I just pulled out from that study cities that had comparable populations to Lewisville, and I wanted to look at how many full-time equivalent jobs were a result of arts and cultural activity in these different cities, where Lewisville fell in, and then also look at the household income generated from those jobs, and then local government revenue that is not just the household income generated, but generated from the activity of attenders and cultural organizations. And so I see what you're doing in Lewisville, and it is tremendous. I also see tremendous opportunity and feel that your big move is going in absolutely the right direction, that there's so much potential, not just to increase quality of life, but to increase the number of jobs, household income, and revenue. In the next slide, I pulled just the Texas cities that were about the same population, so you could get a comparison there. And I think you're doing, you're in the middle of that band. But again, just indicating how much potential it is if you focus on arts and culture, your festivals, the MCL, really growing your creative communities. So I wanted also to talk about cultural tourism. So we've touched on that. We've talked about public art being something that's important, about people coming in from other cities to Lewisville. And here's an illustration of why it's so important. So this is about people coming from outside of Lewisville and spending their money when they come to events at the MCL, or they come to see your public art, or they come to your comedy shows, for example, that are held here. So what you can see here is that whenever a resident goes to an cultural event in Lewisville, you will spend about $15 on average outside the ticket price. And most of that, interestingly, for anybody who owns a restaurant in here, 2/3 of that is spent on food. So art and restaurants are symbiotic. But when someone comes from outside of Lewisville to come to one of your events, they're spending twice as much. And they're bringing that money from outside, and then they're putting it in your Lewisville economy, and then that is going to cycle through, and that is going to enrich everyone here. So you obviously want more cultural tourists in Lewisville who come to festivals, attractions, and then restaurants. Also want to talk about, using sort of the Egypt metaphor, another timeless goal, and that is next generation success. And where do the arts play a part in that? So here, what the Egyptians didn't have that we have is data, right? So we have students in the arts outperform their peers by 9 to 1 points on the SATs, are 44% less likely to use drugs as their peers, 3 times more likely to be recognized for their student achievement. And then if we think about what we're readying our children for, we're readying them to take their place in a highly, highly competitive world. And then there's studies about that as well. So there's an IBM CEO's C-level, C-suite study that comes out every year. And in those studies, they've said, what is it that CEOs want in their future workforce? And creativity is one of the top things that they want, because what we're building is an economy based on innovation. There's also a really interesting article in Science Direct that states that the ability of individuals to engage in creativity and attention to detail simultaneously, which they call ambidextrous behavior, is critical in enhancing the success of new products and innovation. So we want our children to be creative thinkers. That there is science. I only have 10 minutes, but there's a really exciting study that shows that when children learn music at an early age, I'd be glad to share that with you at another time, they actually, their neuronal patterns are formed to help them recognize patterning. And then patterning makes them more musical, but makes them understand mathematics better as well. So business and government leaders, what is it they want? They want a workforce that is prepared. And how do this is we have 200 people a day moving to North Texas, and all of our cities, Frisco, McKinney, Dallas, Fort Worth, we all work together, but we're also competing for that talent pool. So how do we, in Lewisville, attract the kind of businesses that you want, and how do you attract the workers that they're seeking? So the cities that are most attractive are rich in arts and culture. Many studies on that. Economic Development Quarterly authored a report that showed a direct correlation, for example, to the number of performing arts organizations in a city and its attraction of knowledge class, creative class workers. So as you talk about, and there's been a lot of talk about walkability, quality of life, and what they call 15-minute cities, where you can get anywhere in 15 minutes, you're talking about 15 minutes to work, and then to restaurants, but also to entertainment, to music, to galleries, to maker spaces. That's what makes a city fertile. That's what makes a city the place that those knowledge workers want to come to. So, just quickly, I want to sum up. I want you to think about arts and culture. We often think about it as a charity. We also often think about it as something that's kind of fluffy, warm, fuzzy, not for me, perhaps. But I hope that what I've been able to show you in just a few studies, in just a little snippet of what we know, is that arts and culture can strengthen our economy, it can build jobs, it can attract knowledge workers, it can attract businesses. It absolutely, if your child is not involved in the arts, you're not doing them a favor. It absolutely is building the best citizens for our future. And so all of that goes to, now using a more contemporary pyramid, quality of life. That's what we all really want at the end of the day. So I am hoping that you will consider the arts for all of those reasons and continue to support the arts in the way that you're doing, which is really remarkable. And then lastly, I wanted to just go back to that image of Egypt and say that the other thing that I think that we want as individuals is to know that we were here and it mattered. And so arts and culture are also a really important legacy that we can leave the next generation. Thank you. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So let's think about some of those ideas and the perspectives that Catherine shared with you. What do you think about the importance of arts and culture to these various aspects of the community that might be important to us? Think about these and notice that there is a choice of doing more than one, and there's a choice of saying that you don't think that these things are really ones that art and culture do. Okay? So some support there for your thoughts, Catherine. And how do you connect with the arts in Lewisville? Here's some various choices that you might connect with them. Which ones do you do, or what's important to you in the way you relate to the arts here? Okay, so several of those is where we're at, and maybe there's some new things we could be doing here as well. Our next presenter is going to shift to a little bit different subject, which is sustainability. And this is something that's been an important part of Lewisville's thinking and discussions over the last number of years. So we're glad to have George Burmeister here to help us think about how to push that envelope even further. George is president of Colorado Energy Group, and his work focuses on how to integrate energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies into the best practices for cities and for regional and local energy use, and the broader idea of thinking about sustainability. George.
Thank you. Which one is it? Thank you, Karen. That's a better introduction than I had last time. I served in the Clinton and Bush administrations, and the speaker introduced me as someone that everybody has an equal chance to not like. So I am George Burmeister. I'm like Brandon, I'm going to walk around. Hats off to the city for this process, so inclusive. I haven't been to, I work for a couple hundred cities, and I haven't been to a city with as many smiling employees in such a very long time. People call me when they want to do sustainability action plans, and I've been doing it for about 25 years. Donna, with your leadership, and with Mindy, thank you very much. I'm going to go as our keynote speaker talked about. I'm not going to use a lot of words. I'm going to use photos. And I get the cool stuff. I get the fun stuff. I see a law enforcement officer there. The first photo you see there is a facial recognition software. Your sustainability, a lot of people are talking about using facial recognition software for identifying people in your parks, identifying people on your trails. We have lots of data coming in to Chris, your chief information officer, your IT guy. Water quality, energy, asthma rates, telling you when to go outside, when not to go outside. Well, they're talking about new applications with facial software. When I was giving a speech on this in Santa Barbara, somebody stood up out of the audience and said, don't let the librarian get a hold of that. She doesn't like me. I'm always late with my books. She's going to come get me. Equity and inclusiveness. I love seeing all the post-its. There's probably 50 post-its talking about, like this evening is about equity and inclusiveness. Very, very important. I put that up there because low-income neighborhoods are not getting trees planted. Disadvantaged neighborhoods, you're not seeing it. Lewisville is committed to actually planting trees in low-income areas. The city of Detroit, there's so much going on right now with data. The city of Detroit started a digital inclusion officer to include people from low-income neighborhoods that do not get internet. 30% of the city doesn't get internet. 20% of the city only uses their phone for connectivity. So how do you get those people into the city business? That's pretty important. Also, dementia. Baby boomer, we're getting older. They're dementia-friendly cities right now. So it's not just about low income. Excuse me. I'm going to go slow in the first couple of slides here, but fast on the last one. Health and wellness. There's a guy leaving, I guess, a farmer's market in Lewisville, bringing home the bacon or the kale or the Impossible Burger, whatever it is. Many cities are starting safe streets initiatives, 20 miles an hour, no faster. Police enforce it 21, 22 miles an hour, you get a ticket. It's not safe to ride bikes in a lot of places, as Bud will tell us about. But that's a 6% greater chance of obesity if you're in the car. It's all about getting out of the car, getting on bikes, like one of the city's consultants talked about. You're happier, you love your city if you're walking and you're biking in it. It's that simple. This is what I spend 90% of my time on. Sustainability, when they call me, electrification and renewables. You read about cities that are going 50% renewables, which is solar due to the cost of it. It's usually solar. by 2030, or 75%, or 100% by 2030. It's huge, huge issue. Now, with the clean power we have from solar getting to your home, they're talking about appliances inside your home actually going back to the old electric appliances, electric induction stoves, heat pump water heaters, really cool technologies. I'll show you some in a little while, but it's electrifying now that we have clean solar. And I'll debate anybody in the country. I was paid by the solar industry for 20 years. The solar is less expensive than natural gas and coal. It's just the way it is. We're moving that way. So measuring and tracking is the shortest thing I'm going to talk about, because Lewisville already does it. You're doing it well. You started it a long time ago. Just keep doing it. Keep doing it. You don't know what you're measuring. You don't know how to measure your progress, rather. You need to stay on that. Don't change it. Improving resiliency. I've written 43 energy assurance plans for cities. They're energy emergency plans. Old Town, for example, a lot of business community, they're hardening their assets basically by backing them up with solar and battery storage. You probably read about battery storage in most every day in the newspaper, or solar. Businesses, that's a solar PV, a photovoltaic cell powering a generator. Well, it's usually attached to a battery as well. So not just the city backing up its power, but businesses backing up the power, so those wheels of commerce don't stop when the next tornado comes through or the next flood comes through. Those are the big 6 trends that are going right now. Now I'm going to show you one slide. Lewisville, in their wisdom, has put together a draft sustainability action plan. And this plan basically has 8 areas. You see energy is kind of the driver. And energy efficiency drives all the sustainability plans I work on. Plano, the city of Plano has a temperature policy. Don't turn the thermostat up, beyond 74 degrees or 70 degrees in winter and summer. Really simple. Energy and water, waste, equity and inclusiveness, health and wellness, those last 2 things I showed you, those are brand new. It's not your father's Oldsmobile anymore like they used to say. Sustainability plans, and Lewisville's bitten off 2 of those areas to their credit. Transportation, electric scooters. I can't open up anything in the morning. 20 articles on electric scooters every week. Yes, they're unsightly. Yes, they don't last long, but they get people out of their cars. 50% of the people using electric scooters, as Bud will probably talk about, in cities, they're actually replacing car trips, and that's a big deal. So they're electric, and the electric vehicles, of course, there's 1 million electric vehicles now, plus or minus. There'll be 20 million in 2030. So transportation is important. Supporting the green centerpiece. I should have said right off the bat, I'm from here. I grew up in Argyle and Denton, and riding my motorcycle, and I lived in the lake bottoms and lived on the lake in my dad's boat during the summers in college. The centerpiece, connecting parks and trails, that was all over the Stickum notes, thank you. In city operations, the city needs to lead by example. It's that simple. Here's, we're used to, this is probably the only slide I want you to remember when you're talking about not your father's Oldsmobile anymore. We're used to data coming in about traffic. Trash cans, smart trash cans. That trash can you see there has Wi-Fi, powered by solar, and it sends a signal to the Public Works Director to tell them whether it's full or not. And it saves 50% of the labor, and you're not getting rid of FTEs, by the way. They can be put toward other issues. And I'm watching time, holy cow, we're gonna go fast. 15 minutes, or excuse me, 10-minute walk to a park. We love that, that's one of the priorities. And, the real important concept, acupuncture. Parks for Lewisville, as we saw on all your post-it notes, parks serve as acupuncture, as relief to the community. Somebody mentioned that in 2017. That's my home in Boulder, Colorado. I go back and forth to Dallas. I married a woman in Dallas, but that's a pedestrian mall. People come to shop there instead of use our mountains and our hiking trails, which are the best in the country. So no cars, no bikes. It works. Lewisville can do the same thing. Oops, sorry. Farmers market, I'm going to speed through this because Dr. RINCON already talked about food deserts. Thank you, sorry for the slow switch. Oh, plastics. Plastics in Lake Lewisville don't mix. They're big. It's almost a national trend. Plastics are a big issue right now, and permeated concrete is one of those cool technologies. Permeable concrete that slows down the water so it doesn't overwhelm city services. A nod to Robert in the Westside Church. Basically, faith-based organizations are leading on solar, and they install a bunch of energy efficiency here in Lewisville for low income. Thermometer, my one, since I've written more than 100 climate action plans, I gotta say one thing about climate. The thermometer doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Either does the beaver at Lake Leela, or Leela rather, at Lake Lewisville. I threw that in. That's one of Mindy's good big areas. I'm gonna skip through the solar, except to show you that family there probably paid for solar in 10 or 12 years. The solar has a warranty, it'll last for 25 years. They'll get free energy for 15 years. And I've got the numbers, we've got the numbers to show it. The last thing, one of the last slides, see that electric stove there? That's electric induction. If you're powered by solar, it's great to use this. You can have a 500-degree pan of pasta, take it off of there, and your 5-year-old can put his hand on top of that burner, and it doesn't burn them. It's electromagnetic. So it's faster to burn. Chefs like it better, and chefs like it because it's better for delicate cooking. Energy contest. I've got to wrap it up. 30 seconds. Energy contest. Kids at school bring back habits to their parents. Changes habits. Behavior change. That's what it's all about. We talked about the generation Y and Z, basically the keynote, and thank you for your patience, guys. I'm going to go fast here. Extending the green centerpiece. These are bioswales and slowing down water, basically. I know the city of Lewisville has already done some of these, and green roofs save quite a bit of energy. We've got the numbers behind all these, but I'm going to be quiet and get off so the next person can talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. So lots of ideas there and lots more that we could talk about. I want you to think about just a couple of the points that George shared with you. One of those is thinking about the focus for future solar, other renewable energy. Which one of these do you think is the most positive, or the one that we should really focus on first, that has the greatest initial benefit for solar? Okay, city buildings and city-owned land and residential neighborhoods. All of those sound like great possibilities. Another comment that we heard a lot about from you and from others who participated so far in this touch point is about recycling. So tell us a little bit about your own experience with recycling in Lewisville, if you're here in Lewisville, and you can choose choice 6 if you don't live here. But tell us about your experience with that particular aspect of using and reusing. Okay, so pretty easy to do is a pretty strong choice there. So that's really interesting and helpful information. Thank you. Our next presenter is going to focus on another topic we heard a lot about from the community and a lot of interest. And one of the things that's, I think, a little different than when we were doing the 2025 process a few years ago, and that is about mobility and how that connects people together. Bud Melton is a special project manager for Half Associates, and he has spent many, many years of his life looking at all different kinds of mobility and how people get around and what those choices are and how to make those connections for trails, for bikes, for walking, and what some of those new technologies are as well. So he's going to share some of those ideas with you. Bud.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you all for the invitation, the opportunity to be here this evening. And yeah, I'm that guy that used to ride the bike through the 4th of July parade and owned a bike shop for 23 years over in Snyder Plaza, was in the industry for 29 years. And then I met this lady in the middle, Annie Bowman, and she was an urban planner working to make DART, when it got built, to be more successful. She'd had a lot of experience around transit, and she taught me that for DART to be successful, for public transit, DZTA for example too, you've got to be able to ride your bike or walk to get to the stations. Otherwise you'll get in your car and just keep driving. So that was a bit of an epiphany. And a few years later, I decided to change careers. So reinvented myself and joined her. She formed a consulting firm that has really delved into mobility as mobility alternatives. And when we think about mobility, you know, most people really don't follow the process very closely at all. Roads and trails and sidewalks, they just, you know, that's something cities do. They get built. And I can tell you that each and every one of you has an opportunity to have an impact on how that happens. So as you think about the different mobility options, just wanted to share with you some things to think about. As a trail planner, I sometimes get the opportunity to ride in what's called the high railer along rail lines to kind of evaluate the corridors and see what possibilities might be there for rail trails along with the rail lines. And you know, some irony in this photo that says, caution, objects in the mirror may be closer than you think. And I thought that was kind of prophetic. So, you know, that has us thinking, well, how fast does this occur? Well, when you get to be my age, you realize some things don't happen real fast, but if you're patient and you think about it, there's reasons how all this happens. There's ways that all this happens. And a lot of this is with federal funds through our federal transportation dollars. We have a council of governments that helps to make the decisions at the regional level about our mobility options. We'll never get rid of the highway system. Not in our lifetimes. Maybe in our grandchildren's lifetimes, but for now, we've got to have the major infrastructure in place. It's how we connect at the larger regional level. We know we're going to grow, we're going to have more people. How are we going to take care of that? So the fastest way to get around, obviously, is on the highways. Well, not always, but most times. Now we have emerging technologies such as the Uber and Lyft and other rideshare services, and you know, it's very interesting. It's a different world when you can step outside the hotel within the parking garage and have a nice, comfortable seat and wait for the rideshare to come, and you've got your phone and you dial in, you pay for it, you're done, the trip is done, you don't have to worry about the car, you've saved on car insurance, automobile costs, and the fuel costs. So, you know, that's having a big impact on some of our lives here. The high-speed bullet train. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that Texas Central is privately financing a bullet train from Houston to Dallas. And there's arguments about how that's going to happen, but rest assured, it'll probably occur in the next 5 or 6 years that you'll be able to go to downtown, hop on a train, and be in Houston in an hour and a half. One stop in College Station. And maybe even over to Fort Worth in no time at all. And yes, there will also be flying cars, and yes, these are in development. Some of the major building owners around the region are already licensing their rooftops for stops, for drop-offs. These will at some point be safer due to the automation. They will be piloted at first, but these are going to roll out. These are coming our way. But we also have to stop and think about, what about our ability to just walk or ride our bikes? What does that infrastructure look like? Would you put your 8 or 10-year-old out on that and say, okay, have a nice walk to school? Is it safe? Is it comfortable? Many times we'll probably say no. Now, bicycling is in my DNA, and I always like to ask for a show of hands. Who owns a bike? Okay, we didn't have to use the polling. That's just about 100%. So, and who would ride more if you had more fun places to ride? Let the record show, even more. So with that in mind, you know, we ask ourselves, well, who bicycles? We all bicycle. People of all fabrics, all walks of life, love to get out on a bike. Our region has a plan, a blueprint in place that was started over 25 years ago as part of our regional long-range mobility plan. And it is called the VeloWeb. And you'll probably hear that from time to time in news stories. The Dallas Morning News has had a couple of features on it. And it was a interconnected bikeway network to get us to the transit stations and places where we like to shop and work and play and live. And across the region, the cities decided these are good creek corridors, utility corridors, rail corridors, places where you can put trails and weave the region together so that you can enjoy getting on a bike or putting on a good set of sneakers and making your travel by not driving. So this plan had over 400 miles of trails in the 25-year plan. It gets updated every 5 years through public involvement. So 25 years later, the plan has over 450 miles already built, and guess what? Everyone has liked it so well that they've added another almost 1,500 miles to the plan. And cities continue to apply for additional federal funding leverage to get these projects connected up. In fact, my firm, Half Associates, is doing a research project right now for the Council of Governments that includes the cities of Lewisville and Carrollton and Coppell and Dallas and Irving to look at feasibility of connections to transit via trails, some of them even along some of the rail lines, like I've showed you. One of the very first trails in the region was the Katy Trail. This was right after the program was signed into law by George H.W. Bush, right up in Plano, and that funding for the first time gave equal consideration for all modes of transportation, and federal funds could go for all kinds of transportation infrastructure. After 10 years and negotiations with the rail agency, we got the Katy Trail open, and it has proven to be one of Dallas's favorite civic spaces. The city of Austin's done a great job with Lady Bird Lake, and the trails around Lady Bird Lake have continued to be upgraded, made more fun, nicer place to be, even going across the lake. And notice they've used the highway infrastructure to make a really safe and comfortable place for people to cross by bike or on foot. A lot of cities are using their creek corridors or their wooded areas or utility corridors or even the transit lines. Many of the cities like Richardson are using the extra space in the DART alignment for the trails. DCTA has just opened up this month its entire trail from downtown Denton all the way down to the Lewisville-Hebron station. And that can be even connected on into the city in not too many years in the future. Utility corridors. This is over in Highland Village, if you get a chance to see it. I had a role in that. I hope to get it funded, help to get it designed, help to get it built, and worked on the entire city's trail master plan that connects into the adjacent cities, including Lewisville. Now, you know, we think of trails as not just a slab of pavement. It can be a quality of place. In Portland, on the Willamette River, on the east bank, they've done a beautiful job on over 30 miles of the east bank of the Willamette River, it's hard to say, investing in the art and the architecture of place. It's a really delightful place to go. I recommend that you go to Dallas and look at the old Continental Bridge that's been converted to the pedestrian plaza, the Ron Kirk Pedestrian Plaza. There's great restaurants over on the west side of the river and Trinity Groves, and go before sunset, go for a walk, watch the sunset. I assure you, you'll love it. It's like our Paseo, and it draws people from all over. Looking at the economics of investing in this kind of infrastructure, HR&A Advisors did a study for Dallas a few years ago that said for every public dollar spent on an urban park, you get about an $8 to $15 private investment that follows. But for every dollar invested in an urban trail like the Katy Trail, another $50 of private investment follows. So look at think about what that does for the tax base. You can see that makes a difference. The Katy Trail Ice House is one of the largest sales tax collectors in the state for alcoholic beverages. Very few DWIs, not a problem. So yes, they're everywhere, the scooters are everywhere. I call it MIMO, micro-mobility. and it's all kinds of mobility devices. Electric bikes are emerging as a way to get around the scooters. Our challenge is how and where to use them. So that, coupled with other automated vehicles, innovative designs for mobility, and even different takes on the ordinary bicycles that have been cultivated over the years. Just a recap of the value of investing in that kind of infrastructure. People are healthier, there are fewer sick days from work, more productive, save money, that car insurance and fuel, et cetera. Cleaner air quality as a result, and they help reduce traffic congestion. Those are fewer people who are out clogging up the highways for the person that does have to go the longer distance. They have more fun commuting or recreating, and the benefits are many. So with that, I would say, how's the future? Well, the future is here. It's maybe not quite as well distributed as we would like, but know that you and your voice during a process like this is a great opportunity for you to step up to the plate, put your notes on those Post-it boards, and speak your voice to your elected officials and let them know what you support in the way of these kinds of infrastructure improvements. So, thank you. Your vision matters.
Thank you, Bud. Let's get some feedback on some of the ideas that Bud talked about and how they fit with your daily life. I use public transportation, walk, bike, or other non-driving ways to get around. How often do you do that? Take a look at the choices and share with us what your current situation is. Okay, so we've got people doing some of these different things, at least a little while. Maybe there's some further opportunities for us as we look ahead. What would you like to be able to do? That's what this question asks about. Where would you like to go without having to get in your car? As an option, that is. Okay, so several of those already. Lots of things that are interesting for you. So as we think ahead and look at Lewisville's future, this is clearly something that we need to be building in more of. So we've talked about a lot of different ideas about things that could happen, and you've heard about a lot of different groups that are involved along with the city in making these things a reality. But one of the other kind of partnerships that we think is really important is the partnership with the faith-based community. And so our last speaker, Robert Sheets, is a minister at Westside Baptist Church, and he's going to share with you some of the ideas that they've done and the role that they see in partnerships with the community and with the faith-based organizations. Robert.
Thank you so much. What an awesome opportunity to spend some time with you today. They told me to come and preach to you guys, and they told me I had an hour and a half. Join me in celebrating all of our presenters tonight. I'm glad to be involved in a city that is concerned about our future, concerned about what goes on. What an awesome opportunity to grow our city from the outside in and from the inside out. So I look forward to what's going to happen as a result of all of this information that we're compiling today. So I've been in the Lewisville Flower Mound area since 1999. Worked for Texas Instruments, retired from Texas Instruments. But every day I left my house about 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning. I was in manufacturing and went away to work. And I came back 5:30, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the afternoon, and what I realized over time was that I did not know what was going on in my community. Even though we raised 5 children throughout the community of Lewisville Flower Mound, we still had no idea what was really going on in our community. We joined Westside Baptist Church. Let me see where we are on this slide. I'll move up one more. We joined Westside Baptist Church. Westside Baptist Church has been a great church for us. In the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, one of the things that the African American church did was it connected people to what went on in the community. A lot of people had no idea what was going on in their community, but the local church is what connected it. One thing interesting about Westside Baptist Church was planted and founded by an all-white or an Anglo church, Lakeland Church. The pastor of Lakeland Church said that he went to Dallas Theological Seminary, and he said, I want an African-American seminary graduate, and I want that graduate to come, and I want to plant a church with that person. So he did. He planted Westside Baptist Church, started having services in the 1980s, had services in a car wash, and then grew. We were able to buy a building, bought a building, added on to the building, and later on built the building that you see here. We've been invested in the local community, love the local community, and do a lot in our local community. What I want to do today is just kind of inspire you to go back to your local church, your mosque, your synagogue, whatever, and just say, what are we doing that connects us with our local community? One of the things that we've done, we had a number of individuals in our church that were Prairie View or Southern alumni, and some of them got in contact with some of the people at Prairie View A&M and had them come on the weekend that they do their Battle of the Bands at the State Fair Classic, had them come and spend some time with us at our church. So they worship with us. We also were able to get a permit that would allow them to march down the street from our new church to the old church and perform and have a great time. So that was one of the things that we've done that has connected the local church with the community. You can reach out as well with your church, your synagogue, your faith-based organization, and reach out to the local, not necessarily local either, but reach out to the colleges, reach out to the schools, and see what you can do to get involved with them and have them get involved with you. In our area, there's some low income in the area where our church is, and one of the things that we've done is we've partnered with the North Texas Food Bank. We generally do about between 8,000 and 10,000 pounds of produce that we give away to the local community. It gives us an opportunity to speak with them, to pray with them, to spend time with them, and to ask questions about what they need and what's going on in our local communities. Awesome way to do it as well. Open up, provide an opportunity for people to come to your faith-based organization and ask questions and get some feedback and some information as well. Every Thursday morning, there are deacons and ministers from our church that have partnered with the Salvation Army, have people come in that have questions, concerns, issues. Salvation Army? Okay, I saw your hand go up. And people have issues. People have concerns. They have problems. They have things that they want to talk about. So we provide an opportunity for people to come, or we go to them and we pray with them. We talk with them. Just create some opportunity in the local community. We've also gotten involved with the city of Lewisville when they do parades. We get involved with that. We clean up the buses, wash them down, and put all kinds of decorations on them or whatever, and we cruise down and we say, we are Westside Baptist Church and we want to invite you in. Just this month, we went to the Martin Luther King Day Parade. My wife and I walked in the parade, handed out candy, handed out information about our church as well. The Salvation Army came to us and they said, look, we need volunteers. We need people to ring the bells. So over a 4-week span of time, we had a number of people within our church that volunteered to ring the bell. My wife and I rang the bell. My wife went in and out of the store. I wonder what. So I stood there for about a 4-hour shift and rang the bell while she went to the car and got her phone and all these other interesting things. So we've partnered with the Salvation Army, and your faith-based organization can do the same. We also have an athletics ministry at Westside Baptist Church. We've allowed the community to get involved as well, and so we've gotten involved with the Lewisville High School, and so we do an annual event there as well, which is really, really great. And those guys on the team, on our track team, are incredible. They've won a lot of awards. It's kind of like an AAU type of track meet. You want to hear about somebody doing well in athletics, in Lewisville, Westside Baptist Church track team. On Friday, April 4th, looking forward, we're going to have an information booth. We've partnered with the city of Lewisville as well. It's all, to me, about partnering. And we're partnering on April 4th with our seniors. How many of you know people that are elderly, that are seniors? And what we've done in our community is we've caused our elderly and our seniors to think that they're not important. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is reach back and say, look, you're important, and we want to spend time with you. We want to talk with you. We want to tell you what's going on with us, and more importantly, we want to hear what's going on with you. There are so many things that we're doing at Westside. We're just trying to stay involved. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, You name it. All kinds of wonderful activities, all kinds of things that we think are connecting us to the community and connecting the community to us. So your faith-based organization can do the same. It's all about opportunity. Let's not focus on what we look like, where we're from. Let's focus on where we can go together and what we can do together as we grow and as we build. Amen? Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. And with those ideas, let's get some thoughts from y'all about your own faith-based organizations and the role that they play, the kinds of activities that they're involved in this Lewisville community. Interesting. And how do you think that these organizations can help in Lewisville? You heard a number of examples there that might work. What are some of the things that you'd like to see? Okay, so again, some multiple opportunities that might come into play there. So we've covered a lot of ground tonight. We've gone through a lot of different topics and shared a lot of different ideas. And as I think about the comments that I've seen on the boards outside and the feedback we've gotten from people earlier on in this process, there's a lot of opportunity to use all of these ideas in this community, in Lewisville. So as we want to wrap up this evening, we want to think about the synthesis. How do we bring those things together? So I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions here, and I'm going to ask as we do that for our panelists, the keynote speaker and the other panelists, to come up on stage, because in just a minute I'm going to have some opportunity for some dialogue as well. So thinking about those ideas, I know there's a lot of ways these touch on the things that people in this community are interested in. How about those ideas that are, how interesting are they to you? What are the things that you heard? Were you already familiar with this, or were there some new things that you heard tonight? Give us a sense of kind of how much of this you've already heard about, or if there's some that you've learned. Okay, lots of interesting new ideas, so that's great feedback for us. Now think about how you can use some of these ideas yourself in your own life. Are some of these ideas things that you think your neighborhood could use or benefit from? Okay, so lots of potential there. And what about some of these ideas? Do you think that your business or your employer could use some of these ideas? Okay, again, some great opportunity there, great potential. So the last section of questions here are about choices that Lewisville could make, and they're sort of in the intersection between the different comments and different ideas that you heard this evening. So I'm going to go through a series of ideas, and it's going to be the same question for all of them. How important is this choice to creating a future Lewisville where I want to live and work? So how important is each of these ideas to the kind of Lewisville that you want in the future? So here's the first one. Creating the mixed-use walk-up areas with diverse housing and business options. You heard about that from a couple different speakers. How important is that idea to the kind of Lewisville that you want in the future? Okay, now each one of these questions, you're going to have exactly these same answer choices, because again, it's how important is it for the kind of future you want for us to build on the assets of Lewisville's art and its diverse cultures? How important that we build in mobility options from all neighborhoods to important destinations. Notice the word options, so we're getting choices for people in how they get around. Okay. What about strengthening the city's partnerships with the faith-based community and with other kinds of nonprofit groups? And how about acting to make Lewisville's neighborhoods, businesses, and natural areas more sustainable over time? Okay. And lastly, how important is it that we look at the future with a mindset of creating future possibilities instead of solving past problems? Okay, another high mark there. So I asked the folks up here to come up back up on the stage, not just so that they could have to sit here under the bright lights, but because I know that you're thinking about even more feedback to their ideas than what we've already shared. So I'm going to walk downstairs and ask for any of you who have some additional comments or thoughts or suggestions that you'd like to share. And I'm going to start by coming around to the other side of the room. And if you can be succinct about your question or your comment, and then if anybody wants to respond.
I will do my best.
Thank you.
I have a 17-year-old son who is on the autism spectrum and has intellectual disability, and we are going through his transition planning right now. And one thing that I've come to realize is that a lot of the issues that you've discussed are very important to him and to our family, because if Lewisville looked like what many of you have discussed, with different transportation options and different housing options and sustainability, Lewisville would be a place that he could live his entire life and be close to us and live in the place where he's lived since birth with people who know him, rather than have to go move somewhere where he doesn't know anyone and has very few options.
Thank you. Great point, and we appreciate that comment. Other thoughts, other comments? Yep. Go ahead.
So, research showing that our schools are, because of economically segregated neighborhoods, more racially segregated than have been in our history. And I'm wondering if there are programs or initiatives that you've seen cities undertake to mitigate some of that segregation that exists within our schools.
Great. Comment? Ask somebody to respond to that. I don't know. Dr. Rincon, maybe you've seen some of that you might comment on?
Well, schools have employed many options in the past, special training, STEM, special training in certain career fields where I think students from different types of neighborhoods can all learn under one roof and get to know each other. So there have been a number of experiments as well as established types of schools that are drawing, as music, for example, and the arts is another great example, that have drawn, students from racially and income, a lot of diverse students have come under one roof under many of these school options. So it's taken place, it has been taking place. But unfortunately, there's segregation still takes place as well. And some of that has to do with just the choices people make and where they live. Others have to do with transportation, their economic situation, their jobs. So there are many factors that, influence where a person is going to live and where they're going to send their children to school. But I think many communities are trying to at least minimize the effects of segregation.
And if I can add to that, our institutions, education and otherwise, are reflections of the community at large to a large degree. And there are underlying factors and causes, and often they're historical in nature. So it's one of those where, you can Band-Aid it and force a solution that's not sort of organic. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of what we've talked about, providing whether it's different economic strata or different lifestyle choices so different people can live within the same neighborhood and therefore the same district, I think that's an opportunity. Providing greater connectivity and greater mobility options allows for that to happen and that to occur to a degree. So I think you really have to look at from a community perspective of how to get there and how do you create a more inclusive neighborhoods. And I'll close off by saying, and not to get political, but people often think urbanism is a left-leaning issue, the cities and all. Well, I was at a function and Rick Santorum was speaking, hardly, a prophet from the left. And he said there is a reason the word division is in subdivision. It's become part of the DNA, and by finding ways to break down the physical and other economic barriers, I think you'll see that happen more organically over time. But it takes a conscious effort.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Bud.
One initiative that I like to talk about is one undertaken by the Texas Trees Foundation. They were in the news this past week about some of their tree planting initiatives, but they've made a deal with DISD to work with some of the schools, and it's an ongoing program that will be expanded to have the school properties turned into a recreation area like a park for visitation and use during the off hours from the schools. And it's been a very successful program. If you just Google Texas Trees and cool schools, you'll be able to read about that program. It's a great partnership.
Okay, great. Other comments, other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Westside Baptist, for all your support of Salvation Army. Being an elderly senior of the community, one of the things that I look for and have not yet been able to find is some affordable, one-story senior living, and taking into account all the connectivity with transportation, with parks and trails and biking and walking. It would be really terrific if we could start focusing a little bit more, some thoughts about putting in some areas that are going to be appropriate for seniors. Thinking again that as we get older, we can't necessarily drive, but by God, I can ride a three-wheel bicycle.
You go, girl.
And I mean, it would be really helpful for some of us not to have to move out of the community, to have to go live with children in the cold north where I don't want to go. If we could have the sort of resources here where we could stay in the community and have the closeness of the services. That's true.
So comments on that?
So I don't want to.
Go ahead, Bud. You can start and then we'll keep going.
That point I made about your voice is important. I will tell you, and I'm sure there are city council members here who are listening loud and clear, who are hearing you, and when it comes time to the next capital improvements program, you want to make sure that your public works or streets department has those sidewalks that are important to you and your family on the list. That's key to that infrastructure coming forward and being built.
And also in terms of the actual housing options themselves, you know, the actual buildings and communities in which you're going to live, don't only be open-minded. I mean, actively look for some of these new opportunities that are out there, whether they're cottage courts, accessory dwelling units, you know, where a property owner has by right the opportunity to, you know, have their garage and create, you know, an apartment there. That becomes a very soft way to introduce new housing options while still maintaining the character of a community. So there are ways to do density, and you can do it in a downtown with a 300-unit apartment building, or with ADUs and townhomes, 1 or 2 levels, you know, that can fit those needs. So be creative, and again, it's up to you all. This is your choice. Come out and support doing these things and adding these new options. It's so easy to get people to fight against change, but change is going to happen, so help direct it.
I was just going to add, you know, there's an old saying in government that public policy is made by those who show up. So I've been to countless council meetings, some of you have. If there's a public hearing about a rezoning, guess who shows up at that rezoning? The people that don't want it. So it's about being vigilant to pay attention to what's on council agendas, what's on planning commission agendas, to make sure that you're stepping up, because who's council members, who do they tend to hear from? The people that don't want it. And they tend to reflect that public policy. They don't really have an out to say, well, where are the people that are in favor of it? So back to all these points that we're making, and I think the theme of the night is, if this is an event-based support, there's also process-based support to be attentive to those meetings and be there and speak on behalf of issues if you think that's in the best interest of the community, because there's always going to be people there opposing it. And again, elected officials are not immune from the push and pull dynamics, and if they're only hearing from people, and we've all been in these meetings where the people will sign their name to practically anything on a petition, they show up for their item, and as soon as their item's over, they leave. And we know that sometimes council meetings are not always the most exciting meetings. Some of the issues are not very sexy, yet they're very impactful. I'm just sharing that with all of you, that some of those are very impactful, especially planning and zoning issues. And you're going to have more of those, whether it's vertical zoning or rezoning. Height requirements is all that stuff which seems a little dull. It's the classic NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. And what we're seeing is a trend, especially with young people, they want more variety, more lifestyle choices in how they live. So we're seeing different trends happen around the country. Just sharing that with you about being that supportive, that you have to sort of show up and say, you speak on behalf of that. And maybe you sign a petition that says we want to make this happen, not just what we don't want. A lot of communities know what they don't want. They often don't know what they do want.
Okay, thank you. One more comment.
My mom passed away about 2.5 years ago or so, and just prior to that, I was looking through the Lewisville Flower Mound communities for senior centers and different types of organizations that I could get her plugged into in the event that we moved her here from Oklahoma. There's been a large influx of senior centers and senior living facilities in the Lewisville Flower Mound area, specifically Flower Mound. But the question and the key is affordability. I'm not seeing affordability at all anywhere throughout the region. So,
So that's the continuing challenge
Right.
then. Let me ask you to give all of our speakers a round of applause, please. I think they've done a fantastic job of bringing some new ideas and building on things that are already going on in Lewisville. Before we wrap up this evening, I have one other slide I wanted to share with you very briefly, and that is the next steps. Because I know if I come to a session like this and I come and share my time when I could be doing a lot of other things, I want to know what's going to happen with that input and with that information. So I want you to know that the information that you've shared with us tonight out at all the stations, with the keypad polling, with these questions, are all things that are going to become part of the information we use to update the city's plan, to update that 2025 plan and look ahead to 2035. So we'll be putting all these together, thinking them through, bringing them back to the city council to get discussion and direction on the things that ought to be the next steps forward for Lewisville to achieve the kind of community that you all clearly continue to want. So that's going to be the kind of the bigger picture of what's going to happen. If you have some other ideas now that you'd still like to put on the Post-it notes, you can still do that after we wrap up here. Those stations are still available for a little while longer if you'd like to go back and add to those. You can also go online and provide some comments that way as well. As we move forward with this process, there will be other opportunities for you to see what happens, what the recommendations are, to comment and provide input on those recommendations as we move forward. So I hope that you've signed up in a way with an email address or some other contact so the city can let you know, and you can stay in touch and you can stay involved, as you've heard from a lot of the speakers this evening. Our expectation is that this updated plan will be getting developed with further input, and that the City Council will be taking a look at that and taking some action probably in around the late summer or early fall of this year. So we're excited about the progress that's been made since the 2025 plan was adopted. We want to move quickly because we're excited about these ideas that build on that future. And I think it's most important to say that over time, we tried to do a lot of outreach in the community when that 2025 plan was developed. We got a lot. We heard a lot of feedback, and that really shaped that plan. This time around, I think there's even more. And so your comments, your involvement is critical, and it's extremely valuable. So I really appreciate you sharing your time with us this evening. I appreciate your concern for the community of Lewisville, and I look forward to having you continue to be involved, not only to see how the plan shapes up, but then to help carry it out, because that's really what we're after, is to implement it in the same way the city's been doing. So with that, I want to thank you for coming this evening and invite you to add some more comments to the Post-its if you'd like. I do have one other request. As you leave, please give the keypads back, because like I said before, they will not work on your garage door opener. They will not work on your television. They won't do you any good at your house. Thank you very much, and we're adjourned.